Welcome, everyone. Really excited to see a room full of people here. Appreciate you all joining us today. We're going to spend a little time, I guess over the next hour-ish or so, talking about how your client experience program can also support employee retention. And use it to keep your best people. How many of you in here are struggling with employee retention or finding employees or capacity issues related to yeah, that's what I thought, the majority of hands going up. And I think that it's prevalent no matter what industry you're in. So whether you're in the accounting space or you're in architecture, engineering, construction, any kind of professional services, I think we all are facing similar challenges as it relates to people and finding people and keeping our best people. And so I think that one of the things that I've been sort of playing around with in my own mind over the last couple of years is this connection between employee retention and the client experience that we are providing. And so we're going to spend a little more time today exploring that connection and looking at how we can maybe augment what we are doing from a client experience perspective to create maybe a better balance between serving our best clients with the best that we have and making sure that we are providing that excellent experience for our clients, but also not doing it in such a way that we're overtaxing our people, because I think that there is a balance there that we need to find. And I think that in our role as client experience professionals, if that's your full-time role or if that's a part-time role for you, I think that there's an interest in that for you as well. So we're going to explore what that is. This is my bio, just a little bit about me for those of you who don't know me. I know a few of you in this room from other organizations, but I have not been part of this program before, and client experience is somewhat new to me as well. So I'm really excited to be here. I am co-founder and president of a firm called the Whetstone Group, and our mandate since we started our firm in 2000 was top-line growth, specifically for accounting firms, although we have worked with other professional service firms as well. But we have been really focused on top-line growth and what that looks like and how do we achieve it in all different forms and capacities for professional services. And as all of you know, and as you know from that first session and that first poll that Ryan did, growth is a primary function of client experience. And so we have migrated into that space because it's such an important part of a firm's overall strategy for growth. So that's kind of how I came to be in this world and be here in front of you folks today. I was with a national marketing organization for a top accounting firm prior to that, so I've been doing this for a long time. My bio says more than 25 years, and I don't want to tell you how many more than 25. We're just going to stick to that, but I've been around doing this for a long time. This is my family. Those are my rescue dogs. Those are a couple other side passions for me. I'm into the whole rescue pup thing, so that's my family. So I want to start with a mindset, I think, that maybe we need to start to not only adopt for ourselves, but maybe also start to offer to the people that we work with inside of our firms, inside of our teams, and maybe even into our client relationships, and that every organization is perfectly designed to produce the results that it does. So you have a client experience that you are delivering right now, and some of that is maybe intentional, and maybe some of it is not quite as intentional as we would like it to be. But whatever it is, that system, that structure is producing a result. And we hope, as client service professionals, as client experience professionals, that the result is that our clients love us and that they become loyal and that they stay with us and they buy more and they pay more and all of those reasons why that's important. But we also need to think about what are some of the negative outcomes that that might be producing, and what do we need to change within our existing system if we want to produce a different result. Because if the result of our existing program is that maybe it's contributing to some of our professionals leaving our organizations or contributing to some of our capacity issues in some way, what can we do to change within the system and start to evolve into a different direction so that we can produce maybe a different result than what we wanted? I call this the great sort of revolution. I think it's more of an evolution, but in terms of what's happening with people and what's happening with capacity issues across the profession, there's a lot of talk about the Great Resignation. It's been in the news. I think it's even before the pandemic was a thing, people were struggling with capacity issues inside of the firms. I think it's been exacerbated by what's happened over the last couple of years with COVID and people looking at opportunities and thinking about sort of that work-life balance and what they can achieve maybe in a different location from where they are today. I think that, there's like a transformative mindset that has happened around this for employers, for some employers, not every employer, but I think a lot of employers are starting to sort of evaluate, what is it that we are in the business to do? Is it that we are in business to create profit? Yes. Is it that we are in business to grow? Yes. Is it that we are in business to serve our customers? Yes. But I think the thing that they're adding to that, why are we in business, is to also take care of our people, to be a resource for our people, because we've recognized that that human component, that element of the asset of our people inside of our organizations is maybe one of our more important assets, and that's one of the things that maybe we didn't pay as much attention to 10 years ago or so. And so we're kind of unlearning and relearning what drives the business model. So the business model has been driven by revenue, profit, doing more for our existing clients, and all of those reasons why many of us sort of migrated into client experience, including me. That's one of the reasons why I started looking at client experience and looking at client service as an opportunity, because it is strongly tied to that growth model. But I think what also drives the business model is our ability to create a space and a culture where our people want to stay and where our people can find themselves fulfilled and doing work that they love and all of those things. So I know that gets a little squishy for some of us, because there are a lot of people in here who are super into data and are really into the metrics, and I think that those things are really, really important. But I think it's important for us to look at what do the data and metrics tell us about the experience that our employees are having and how it is positively or negatively impacting how they feel about working inside of our organization. There's been that pretty steady shift, as I mentioned, which has accelerated in the recognition of value and key assets. And a lot of firms that we work with, and a lot of firms that I have talked with, over the last few weeks, and even probably the last few years, are moving away from this client-first mentality, this client-first paradigm. And specifically in the accounting profession, it was client-first for a really long time. We were going to bend over backwards and do everything that we could for every single client, and we didn't want to tell anybody no, and we really wanted to be sort of that ultimate be-all, end-all resource for our clients. And what firms have recognized is that we need to maybe shift that mindset a little bit. And maybe we don't need to be the be-all, end-all for every single client that we serve. Maybe we need to look at which clients need that kind of experience and which ones we want to foster that loyalty in and be a little more selective about that. And again, how do we balance that? How do we balance delivering what it is that our clients really want and need from us and what's going to be the most helpful with a space and a culture that our people can also grow in and excel in and feel good about. So I think that what this means for client experience is that it maybe alters or maybe adds to a little bit our strategic purpose. So I think fundamentally the strategic purpose of client experience is still growth, right? We still know that it's an important strategic element of why we're here. But I also think, and a lot of firms entered into it under the first paradigm, but I also think that there's a new element, a new piece of that strategic component that needs to be people-focused. There's a little statistic in here. So again, we work with a lot of CPA firms, and more than 80% of CPA firm respondents from a sample study that we did, so this was about 500 firms, said that they don't regularly gather feedback from their clients. So those of you who are in this room, and I don't know exactly what that number would be in some of the other professional service spaces, but for those of you that are in the accounting space, if you're doing this, you're already a little bit ahead. You're farther ahead in this process than 80% of the firms that we have talked with in terms of gathering that feedback. So there's still opportunity. If you're brand new in this, so we talked about what stage everybody is in that first session, and some of you are in the really early stages. If you're in the early stages, there's still opportunity to use it as a differentiator. If you're there and already more established, there's also still an opportunity to use it as a differentiator. So I think that that's an important piece of it. We talk about and sort of think about three levels of, success or three levels of measurement that we are concerned about with client experience. The first level is satisfaction and net promoter score, which a lot of people are measuring on a regular basis. The next level is that little deeper sort of voice of the client piece, where we're really starting to go beyond maybe some of the metrics-based stuff into some of the interviews and the conversations and the one-on-ones that we've talked about. And then the third level is training people in the firm to deliver. So I think that's the element. And in my experience, the firms that are doing a really good job with client experience are closing the loop by training their people and teaching their people. And I think this is where the opportunity with talent retention really falls. When we can teach our people and train our people on what's most important to our clients, what are the boundaries, what are the guardrails that we're going to establish for you in order to sort of protect you from having to be in that position of deciding, what we need to respond to and what we don't need to respond to, and then training our people specifically on the behaviors of those attributes, the behaviors of what it looks like. And, Jen was talking a little bit about that for those of you that were in her session, by sharing the stories of the people that are serving clients and the success stories and being really, really specific about the things that are driving that loyalty or that we're driving that client experience case study in her firm. I think that's really important, but I think getting it down to the behaviors that we want people to engage in consistently is really important. And I think when you start to set those expectations for your people, you give them not only the space to be empowered to be able to deliver consistently, but you also tell them what it is acceptable to say no to in the course of the client relationship, which I think is sometimes equally important. So to truly be strategic and use that function of client experience as a strategic opportunity, I think that we have to go a little bit deeper into the experience that our clients are having. It's important because, and the reason I think that this is important for client experience professionals is the impact that employee turnover has on client experience is significant. I think when we talk about and think about from a client's perspective, people who are rotating in and out from the client service team, right? People who are, I'm constantly having to learn about somebody who's new, or maybe there's an opportunity that we're missing to actually train that person on, moving into a new position or serving a new client relationship. So the client didn't change, but our team changed, and so that affects the relationship. And so as professionals who are focused on maximizing client experience for all of those outcomes that we have talked about, I think it's a really important aspect to keep our eye on. I think professionals who are really deeply invested in managing client experience, this is an area where you can have some influence inside of your organizations, and it may not necessarily be something where you have a whole lot of influence right now, and I definitely think that it's not something that you own sole responsibility for. So client experience professionals do not own responsibility for employee retention, but I do think that you have access to a lot of information, a lot of data, a lot of commentary that can affect that. And if you're looking at this sort of from a holistic perspective inside of your firm, this is something that your leadership teams should care about. This is something that your people development people will care about. This is something that the team leaders inside of your organization who are really trying to figure out how do we continue with continuity and do all of those things are going to care about. So this could be an area where you could have some influence inside of your firm as well. So I think that it's one of those things that it creates an opportunity, a new opportunity for client experience that maybe we haven't thought about. So and if you are in that role right now, if you are in that role where you are figuring out how you fit into the larger strategic direction of your firm as a client experience professional, if you have people inside of your firm that don't really get it, some of us may be in firms where we have a client experience professional because we went to a conference and we heard that we need to have one, but we don't really understand what it is or how that person is supposed to function or what the integration is. And it's one of those things that sort of sits over here. This is an opportunity to level up strategic value if you're trying to figure out and make the business case internally to your leadership. Why do I need more budget? Why do I need more people? Why do I need a department? Why do I need tools? This is another reason for you as a professional to be able to go to your leadership and team if you're not part of that team directly, and some of you in this room maybe are, but I think that it's a really good opportunity for you to sort of level up in that regard. And we think about I think we think also about the leading versus lagging indicator here, because a lagging indicator, I think, is when people are leaving, right? When we get to the exit interview process. That's, that's our opportunity to look back and say, okay, what could we have done differently? But it's a lagging indicator. It's things that have already happened. And hopefully we're using that to make decisions about how to do things differently in the future, but not always. And so the other opportunity that I think we have in this space is to be able to start to get ahead of some of these things by taking sort of a more proactive approach to our client experience process and what we're learning from that, and making decisions about where we are going to use that to impact employee and culture and retention before it gets to the point where our employees are leaving. So I think there is an opportunity to make this kind of a leading indicator as well. It's an interesting time for professional services in that, again, we've talked already about sort of the pendulum swing that's come, back into employees being top of mind and first and foremost. And I hear some firms talk about the fact that they don't necessarily, want or need to invest in marketing and or client experience because we can't grow right now. We were focused on growth 10 years ago, and we brought in a whole bunch of clients, and maybe they're the right kinds of clients, and maybe they're not the right kinds of clients, but regardless, now they're our clients, and we have to figure out how to serve them with the people we have. And we also have this capacity issue that's putting pressure on us. And so the pendulum has started to swing back the other direction, I think, in that that's where firms are starting to recognize that we've got to deal with capacity challenges. And so sometimes the result of that is leaders say, we're going to put a hold on some of this other stuff and we're going to focus on our capacity challenges. And that's when resources get constrained sometimes. That's when we see maybe budget cuts, or we see we're not going to invest in this tool, or we're not going to add this team member right now because we've got to deal with the capacity challenge over here. So if you're in that place inside your firm where you're having to kind of make your case for why you need to be continually why this is a continual area of investment, I think that tying what you do to this big need that your firms have internally, tying it to this capacity and this talent retention issue is a really good business case for those of you that feel like you need some extra ammunition to be able to get the resources that you need to be able to do your job effectively, or to even expand and grow your position. And we know that this isn't one of those things that we should, we turn off and on, right? We know that we need to be paying attention to this and maintaining it and nurturing it all the time inside of our firms. But when you start looking at, some of those sort of hot button issues that leaders might be thinking about or that might be relevant to your firm, anything that you can be doing to tie yourself to capacity and talent retention, I think, will make you a more strategic option inside of the firm. Any questions so far? Any of you guys seen any of this inside of your firm? And I mentioned earlier that the primary bulk of my experience is with the accounting space, but there is a lot that I think is relevant to law firms, architecture firms, engineering firms. So those of you who are in those other spaces, if you want to talk about or add to what we're talking about by explaining a little bit more about how it works in your firm, I would love to hear that, because I was having a conversation with someone who works at a law firm last night, and we were kind of talking about, the differences in business models. The accounting space is really built on sort of an annuity kind of profession. We get clients and we retain clients for 20 years or so. And the law firm model is a little bit different. They have relationships that they're nurturing over that period of time, but they only need you when they need you. And so, there's a lot of, a heavy reliance on referrals and some of those other things, which are important in our space. So there's a little bit of difference in the different kinds of business models. So if you hear anything and you're like, that works a little bit differently in my space, I would love to hear from you guys on what that looks like. All right. So a firm believer that if we're going to find a solution, we got to identify the problem first. We need to understand what is the challenge that we are dealing with and what are some of the leading indicators and causes of turnover. So the more we understand about the reasons why turnover is an issue and what's driving it, the more we can be informed about how we can augment what we do and make a bigger difference. So according to the Society for HR Management, SHRM, I don't know if any of you is familiar with that, these are the top 5 reasons or the top causes of burnover. So this was back from the 2022 survey that they did of their HR professionals. And this was not specific to professional service firms. So this is across all different kinds of organizations. But lack of growth and development, burnout, which we hear about, read about, lack of feedback and recognition internally. I think that's number 3. That's a big one, especially among the millennial generation. So those of you that have millennials, and as we move into the next generation of Gen Z, and I'm a parent of Gen Zers, and I can tell you that they constantly need feedback and constantly want recognition. Maybe not such a great way, but it is what it is. Negative view of management and perception that management doesn't have my back. And somebody said that earlier today. I think maybe it was Ryan talking about how, the distinction between the high performers, right? The high performers, high performers are that feel supported by management are more likely to contribute, but they also are the ones that get really upset about not dealing with poor performance, right? They're the ones that are really critical of leaders, critical of management for letting bad behavior sort of go. So I think that that's maybe part of what is happening there. And then just overall toxic workplace culture, just meaning I don't feel supported, I don't feel like there's an opportunity for me to grow, I don't necessarily feel like the work is challenging. There were a lot of things that fed into that, but it was sort of under this umbrella of toxic workplace culture. And probably some of that is related to the negative view of management and allowing bad behavior to persist. But these are the top reasons why people leave. I want to explore that concept of burnout a little bit because I know that that's a big one across a lot of professions. So there was a 2021 survey by Indeed that found that 52% of employees reported that they were suffering from burnout. And this was up from a year before, which was 43% a year earlier, 23% increase, but still a pretty significant portion of the workforce that's just feeling overwhelmed and burned out and feeling like maybe they have bit off more than they can chew in their professionals. And if we leave this unchecked, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for that to fester inside of a person and inside of our organizations. And I also think that it's one of those things that can lead to some of that toxic culture that we talked about. These are some things that we know are kind of signals of employee burnout. So if you're looking inside of your firm, you're looking at your client service teams, you're looking at the teams you manage, you're looking at the people who are responsible for providing that great client experience that you hope will drive loyalty and achieve all of those things that we want. That lack of motivation and taking ownership. And we hear that a lot where managers will say, man, I can't get people below me to feel like they're taking ownership in what they do. There's no sense of urgency. We set deadlines for them. Timeliness is important, and we set deadlines for them, and they just don't get around to stuff. And so I think that's one of the signs that maybe there's some burnout happening there. Lack of joy or satisfaction at work, a sense of inefficacy, meaning I feel like I'm just kind of churning my wheels, but I don't really understand the value that I'm creating, or I don't know how to articulate the value that I'm creating. And that can be really hard, especially in a professional services space where we don't really deliver something that's a tangible thing, right? A lot of what we deliver is based on how the client feels about it and what the value is for the client. And if we're unsure of that in ourselves, it can be really difficult for us to feel good about what we're delivering to clients. So that sense of inefficacy. I think the other thing that contributes to that is there is a ton of change that's happening outside of our firms in addition to what's happening inside of our firms. So technology is changing the way that businesses work. Legislation and different rules and regulations are affecting every industry, and so this feeling that I just can never get ahead of all of those things, I think, is another piece of that, and just a general sense of overwhelm and feeling like people are overwhelmed. So when we think about some of the workplace drivers that may be contributing to those things, there's a lot of things that people have been dealing with outside of their workplace that have contributed to this. So I don't want to minimize what's been happening in our environment, what's been happening with COVID and the way that people adjusted during the pandemic, and the way that they're adjusting to all of these other things that don't have anything to do inside of their workplace. But we have the ability to maybe affect that big place where they spend a lot of their time, which is their workplace. So some of the drivers of those things that are burning our employees out are lack of recognition from leadership, unrealistic deadlines, back to setting expectations. I've heard a couple of people talk about that already, setting unrealistic expectations or not being clear about expectations with our clients. So, feeling like there's an unrealistic deadline or expectation, constantly working, long hours, weekends, feeling like we have so much work, and that's directly related to the capacity issue. When we don't have enough people to serve all of the clients that we're committed to serving, that's one of the things that contributes to our people feeling burned out. And also a feeling of lack of control over the work that we're doing. So feeling like, we don't really have control over our own schedule. We have somebody else that's sort of promising on our behalf, or we have clients that are demanding things, or a sales team where it's not coming together because the sales team has promised one thing and now we're set to deliver it, and it's not really within our skill set, or whatever it is, which leads us to be inefficient and maybe work longer hours. So there are lots of things that in the system that can be contributing to those drivers of burnout. So let's talk about that. First of all, let's talk about what you guys are seeing inside of your firms in terms of the rates of burnout, in terms of turnover. Who's feeling like they have more turnover this year than they did last year? We had that slide or that poll that was in the first session, and there was a significant portion of people that felt like their turnover was maybe even a little bit greater than what they had, than what their peers were experiencing, their peer competitors were experiencing. So what are you guys seeing inside of your firms? You had a lot of turnover last year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a small company, so I'm always, but
Yeah.
I have 4 techs that do IT. 3 of them left last year.
Yeah.
So 7 left.
Yeah.
And they've been there 1, 3, and 4 years now.
Yeah. It's rough and it's disheartening. It's hard not to take that personal as a business owner, isn't it? I take that personally for me. Like when I have an employee that leaves our firm. Yeah, yeah. So it does, and it also leaves the people who are there, feeling like now I've got to take on more work. My husband is a physical therapist, right? So he's in healthcare, and healthcare not immune from this. His physical therapy practice, which normally operates with around 30 in his region, about 30 actual therapists, is down 9 people right now, 9 therapists, and so everybody who's there has been asked, can you see an extra patient here and there? And they're already overwhelmed. They're already, healthcare is one of those industries where there's a lot of change and there's a lot of sort of contentious stuff going on. And, it's a troubling time for a lot of different industries. Anybody else? One more person. What's going on with turnover?
So I was actually part of the turnover in my last company.
So we hate you.
But there were reasons why. I mean,
Yeah.
I was there for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
I actually started out as a client success manager, senior client success manager, and ended up managing the team of client success managers. And so, what happened in the beginning of this year is that, well, one, there's a new company that took over. But before that, prior to that, it was just a leadership issue. Being in the CX, the whole client first. My company is more software as a service, so we hardware and software for clients, field tracking, that kind of thing. And so it was hard to get the voice of the client to leadership in different departments. And so our CX team just wasn't listened to. And after a while, that just kind of, you feel like you're spinning your wheels, you're not doing anything. And I moved up from like, hey, just to see as simple, like I have a whole team, and I still wasn't getting that pushback. It's that with a lot of benefits and things, leaving when the new company took over, and we lost a lot of people. They laid off 40 people, and then in the 6 weeks since then, 41 voluntarily left.
Yeah.
So it's an environment that used to be very great, became very not great, and people, of course, because the job market is what the job market is. And so I didn't have a team, I had 3 left.
Yeah.
Because by the time I ended up leaving, my director left before. So
Right.
it's just a trouble.
So a lot of contributing factors, a lot of that not listening among departments, leadership, not having your back, right? So a lot of the things that we've talked about. So again, I think there's no business right now that I've come across that is immune to some of the things that we've been talking about. So that's the problem. That's the challenge that we're trying to solve, or at least that we are trying to impact with, the thing that we are already doing. So I'm a big believer that if we can take something that we're already doing and tweak it versus having to start something from scratch, let's do that. So if you have client experience functioning inside of your firm, let's figure out how we can apply what we're already doing to this problem at hand, to this challenge, and start to make a case for it. So let's talk about that. How can our client experience intelligence? How can what we are learning through our client experience programs help us to combat some of these things? So I think one of the things that we can do inside of our firms with the information that we're learning is to start to prevent what I call, or stop what I call, client service whack-a-mole. And client service whack-a-mole is, I am someone who's part of a client service team, and I don't really understand exactly where the boundaries are for client service. And so when I don't understand the boundaries, my instinct as someone who really wants to do a good job, who really wants to serve my clients well, who wants to be valued, who's maybe looking at what my career path is and what I need to do to get ahead inside of my firm, treats every single issue, every client complaint, everything that they hear about kind of equally, and you're always sort of trying to put out fires, right? And it's a tough place to operate from. It's a tough place to be focused on the extra special things that we want to do, that extra mile that we want to go to with our existing clients, when we feel like we're, constantly just trying to hit those little moles that are coming up out of the arcade game, right? So teach your people which client feedback to prioritize. So as you are starting to learn this, as you are, creating dashboards to understand what those common, what the common issues are, what are the things that we're hearing about most frequently, what are the things that are really significant, and the things that are, maybe personality driven, or maybe a one-off thing, or somebody was, having a bad day when we called them and talked to them, or whatever it is. You'll start to learn that through your metrics. And when you conduct regular surveys and you're staying on top of this and using it again, as more of a predictive indicator than something that's happened in the past, I think there's an opportunity then for firms to be able to take that information and teach people and train people. These are the things that are the most important to us and that are most important to our culture. And again, I loved what Jen was saying earlier about tying this back to your values as an organization, like looking at what do we really value as an organization. We value, doing more for our clients, making our clients' lives better. Whatever that thing is, making our clients' space more beautiful, whatever that thing is that's part of your mission, part of your value system, what are the things that we are receiving feedback on that are that are contributing to our ability to deliver on that, and how do we set those boundaries? I think the other thing that this does is, and Ryan said this earlier, and I have found this to be true, and those of you who have been doing this longer than I have probably have found this as well, that the more feedback you ask for, the more frequently you're asking for feedback, the more you're measuring that, the fewer complaints you start to have. There is a place where it starts to drop off. And so what that means and how that impacts your employees is they're having to deal with fewer issues in real time. They're having fewer of those calls that they're going to field. Clients know that there's a system there for them to deliver some of that feedback or that constructive criticism that we all love to get. And so when they know that feedback loop sort of exists and that it's, they're going to have their opportunity to voice that, I think it also takes the pressure off staff from having to field those all the time. And they can really focus on what their core mission is and delivering on what it is that their value proposition is to clients. I think it also sheds some light on the things that are less important, right? And when you look at your dashboards and you look at your metrics, we focus on the top things, but we also know that there are some things that fall to the bottom that are maybe less important. Maybe the biggest complaint that our clients have is that our fees are too high. And maybe as an organization, we don't care that our fees are too high because the value is so much greater and we can demonstrate that and prove it in any number of ways. And the experience is so fantastic that, we don't want to be the low-cost provider. And so understanding that, again, that's a very simplistic example, but understanding what we're not going to prioritize and what we're not going to give on, and teaching, again, our people how to deal with those situations, doing training with our team on how to deal with some of those situations or how to escalate it, I think is really important. If one of your behaviors that you really want to encourage is we want personal relationships with our clients, we want to know things about them, we want to go and become, more of a human connection than just sort of a transactional kind of relationship-oriented connection, firms might be willing to see a small decrease in efficiency. They might be able to see, be willing to sacrifice a small amount of realization that's lost or a small amount of profitability that we give up in order to, play the long game and secure those relationships for the long haul. So making space for that. I think that this is an opportunity also to take a look at the KPIs that your firm is measuring regularly and make sure that the KPIs that you're measuring are also aligned with the things that are most important, and not focus on the KPIs that maybe are not contributing to the experience that we want or that are less important. So again, another example of that is that efficiency. So if you're measuring on a billing per hour sort of rate, if you're looking at 90% realization on the billings that you're creating for your firm, maybe we're willing to drop that down to 89 or 88 if we want to give up a little bit of that space for our people to spend more time with clients that is non-billable time and that is an investment in the relationship. So again, looking at your KPIs and making sure that you're adjusting those standards accordingly based on what is less important. We don't want to measure everything equally. There's an opportunity also to standardize client service procedures. And what I mean by that is making sure that everyone in the organization understands this is how we serve clients, and getting it down to the specific behavior. So if one of the attributes that we want to deliver is we want to be proactive with our clients, we want to be there before they even know that they need us in whatever shape that takes, if that's an attribute that you want to deliver on, we need to teach people how to do that and what that means, because people can interpret that in different ways. And so the standard behavior is proactive means that we are going to interact with our clients, 6 times during the year. And it doesn't have to be connected to a project. It doesn't have to be connected to an opportunity, but we're going to have 6 touches. And so our client service process, our client experience process is going to include these 6 behaviors that we want to make sure are standardized across the organization. And then then have transparency into who's responsible for those things, and everyone can be responsible in different ways. I think it's really important to also look at this based on the type of relationship that people in your organization have with a client. So when you're serving clients in a team-oriented manner, right, there's a relationship leader, there's somebody that's sort of ultimately responsible, and there may be some folks that are maybe more project managers that are responsible for moving projects through the cycle, and then there may be the doers, right? There may be sort of the staff people, the less experienced folks that are the more technical people that are responsible at that level. And those people all have different kinds of relationships. So the behaviors that we expect from the relationship manager may be different, but we can all be proactive at every level. So a proactive staff person may be proactive within the team to go to the partner who's in charge of the relationship and say, here's something that I think we need to pay attention to. Here's something that I observed as I was doing my work that seems a little bit different from some of the other projects that I've worked on, and maybe we need to explore and have a conversation. That's being proactive on behalf of the client. Proactive at that relationship manager level might be, I'm going to go to the client and sit down, and we're going to do a needs assessment twice a year and just have a conversation about what's happening in their business so that I can start to learn all of that and curate it and bring it back to the team. But there are elements of, quote, being proactive that are appropriate at every single level inside of your organization. And so defining specifically what are the behaviors that we want people to engage in if we're going to deliver on that, I think is really important. This is, I think, a key element also with communication is another area where standardizing what communication practices, what communication standards we want to hold out for everyone. And again, once your people understand what the expectation is and what their role is, they're not responding and reacting to everything. They have the opportunity to figure out how to build it into the way that they're serving their customers, the way they're serving their clients, as opposed to always constantly reacting and taking their cue from those existing clients. I think the other opportunity is fostering loyalty and increasing client loyalty and reducing complaints. We've already kind of talked about this in a number of other capacities, but we know the more we talk to our clients and give them this opportunity, the fewer complaints that we have. And I think that it is an opportunity to really look at our existing clients and figure out which ones do we want to make sure stay loyal, and how are we going to really focus our initiative on client experience on the ones that we want to make sure stay loyal, and which ones, would we be okay if they weren't quite as loyal to us. We all have clients in our practices that we maybe wish we didn't have, for lack of a better way of thinking about that. So again, I think it has the dual benefit of being able to reduce complaints and foster loyalty. Any questions? We're doing on time. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about that people first mindset and what do we need to be doing. So those are some opportunities within your client experience program to maybe look at this a little bit differently. Teaching your people to set boundaries. So what do we do with that? We've identified some of those opportunities. What do we do with that? I think using what you learn to help staff set reasonable boundaries, and this is probably, in my experience, one of the most difficult aspects of incorporating this and using this information into the way that you're working with your existing customers. And again, I recognize that many of you in here are not directly responsible for this, so I think that your role could be in this identifying some of those behaviors, some of those attributes that are driving loyalty, some of those things that might be contributing to burnout, and having that conversation, being that voice of, here's what our clients are saying about us, here's what our customers are telling us, to the folks that might be a little bit more closely tied to some of these things. But I think when everybody inside of your organization understands, here are the rules of engagement, discovering, here's where the rules of engagement are happening, and this is what it looks like. I think the client mapping, those of you who are not doing client journey mapping or have not yet done that, I think this is a really good opportunity to look at client journey mapping and figure out, where are the boundaries within each of those stages of that client journey. Here are the things that we want to make sure we are including in the experience that we're providing as our clients go through that journey from, the marketing portion all the way to the loyalty portion, and here's how they're feeling about it, and here's what we want to make sure. These are the things that are non-negotiable in that. And then in addition to that, we're going to teach our people how to sort of read the room within the relationship. We're going to teach them how to set some boundaries and how to communicate effectively. And designing a program, I think, is really important. I think the other aspect of this then is making sure that your leadership, so again, our people need to feel supported, that your leadership understands the boundaries as well. Because if you say to, a mid-level, a manager level person, or, somebody that's early in their career, here are the boundaries, here are the expectations, here are all these things. And there's a disconnect between the person who's responsible for the relationship or who manages those people that has a different expectation, doesn't understand the boundaries, is still sort of focused on the client-first mentality and hasn't really made that transition to thinking about how that's affecting our employees. If there's a disconnect there, then that becomes a friction point. And it also becomes a place where your people may not feel supported. I went to training, I learned through client experience I should be doing these 4 things. I have a manager over here that expects more from me or that doesn't prioritize those 4 things. So your entire organization needs to be on the same page with regard to where those boundaries are, and then make sure that if I'm a person that feels like I'm not being supported in that area, that there's a channel for me to go to and have a conversation with somebody about that. But I think that's a really important aspect of this, is making sure that there's alignment from top to bottom inside of the organization, because it doesn't work if you're only dealing with it at 1 or 2 levels inside your organization. Empowering people is another really, really important aspect of this. I love the idea from Ritz-Carlton that we heard about earlier, where they give each person in the organization a budget, right? They give them some money that they can spend on, and let them be sort of discretionary with that and be in the moment with that and make decisions about how they're going to use that to create an awesome experience for a client or for a customer. And I think that empowering people goes a long way inside of your organization toward having them feel valued. When you empower me, there's a trust element that happens there. They feel like you trust them. They feel like, and I think if you're doing the right kind of hiring in your organization, you're not hiring dolts off the street, right? You're going through a process to hire professionals and to hire people who are educated and that you feel like are going to represent your organization well. And when you bring those folks into your organization and then you don't empower them to, do all of those things, which were part of the reason why you hired them, not just their technical skill set, but who they are as people, that can be really disheartening for folks. So empowering them and making sure that they understand that they are empowered to do that and talking to them about what that means. I think a big part of this is also allowing them to reset expectations when things go off the rails. So when we get in that situation where, the sales team promised one thing and we're having a hard time delivering that, empowering them to be able to go and say we need to reset expectations and teaching them how to do that is an important element as well. Another element I think is sharing positive feedback, and I think this is something where we could all benefit from being better about. Again, millennials, our employees, one of the things that causes them to not feel valued is lack of feedback, right? They want feedback. They want to hear how they're doing. And your client experience programs and the interviews that you're doing and the feedback and however you're gathering that oftentimes will produce really great comments about very specific people. And so having a mechanism to feed that back to individuals. So I love the idea of, publishing case studies firm-wide and making those available to everyone, but also direct feedback to the employee himself or herself. This person said this great thing about you, publicizing it with their team, publicizing that with their manager, making sure that it goes into their personnel file so that when it comes to, reward and compensation and evaluation and, looking at promotion, that those things are carried through. So figuring out, how can we take this and incorporate it into our people development and sharing that regularly, I think is also really important. And as we said earlier, your client experience program probably produces 80 or 90% positive comments. There are a few of those negative things that we need to deal with, but there is so much there that would be, again, through a very maybe 1 or 2 small steps in augmentation to actually take it and give it to the person that can use it and that can feed it back to the individual, I think is a really powerful opportunity as well. So sharing that. So let's talk about how we do this. Let's talk about some of those things that we might want to augment. I remember I said at the very beginning of this that every organization is perfectly designed to produce the results that it produces, right? So you're producing a result right now. Are there things that we can look at maybe tweaking inside of our organization to enhance the way that we are contributing to talent retention? I think the first thing is understanding what does the playing field look like. So defining A clients. We can't do this for every single client, and nor should we be delivering that entire boutique client experience, start to finish for every single client in the firm. In most most firms that I know, it's not realistic because of the number of clients. We know the 80-20 rule, right? That 80% of our revenue is likely generated by roughly 20% of our firm's clients. I think that's a really good place to start. Looking at those clients that are most profitable and most important to your firm is a really good place to start. And we got to make sure that those folks are staying loyal. There's some other criteria on that when we are working with firms on defining who the experience is for. There certainly are basic benchmarks that we provide, a standard of quality that we provide to everybody who wants it, right? We're not going to schlock off just because, a client isn't an A client. So I'm not talking about, any kind of negative experience, but when we talk about sort of going above and beyond and making sure that we're fostering loyalty, some other aspects of looking at the relationship might be the ones that are easy to work with. And it might just be as simple as that. You look at the existing clients that you have and say, this person always has their stuff to us on time, or this person always comes ready to listen, or is always prepared when I meet with them, or we just kind of enjoy working with them. They're just like fun to work with. Personality-wise, it's a good fit. So there might be just some of those intangible, easy to work with criteria that you look at. Looking at the total number of services, sort of the total wallet share, total number of services that you're delivering might be an indicator. A lot of times that will go, hand in hand with the revenue. So if you're starting with the 80-20 rule and looking at, the revenue creation, that might be an indicator of total number of services. So if your firm offers, a variety of different departments and it has a variety of different service lines, the number of service lines that they interact with might be an indicator of A clients. Whether or not they're a really great referral source, maybe they don't necessarily meet the 80-20 criteria, but they provide you with so much goodwill in terms of referral sources, and you can connect so many opportunities, the revenue from so many opportunities with them that they sort of move themselves up to that A category. We want to make sure they stay loyal to us, or maybe they're just a really good person to know in the community or in that space where you practice because they're so well connected. Total fees, we talked about. High realization, we're already efficient at serving them. We already know how to do this. We have systems and processes, and everything that we do is already aligned to serve them really well. Again, that's a big one that takes a lot of pressure off your people, because if you're bringing in clients or you're serving a more diverse set of clients, that's one of the things that can be difficult for people to sort of adjust to. And now I've got to learn a new set of KPIs for this client, or I've got to learn, a new set of standards for this client, or I've got to apply a different tool that I don't know how to use. So the more sort of homogenous you can make your client base and the higher that realization and efficiency factor, the easier it is for your people to be able to serve those clients and feel really good about the value they're delivering. Again, sometimes they're just really visible. Sometimes they only work with us for a really small thing, but it's so good for our firm to be connected with them because they're so well connected. So these are some of the things that as you're looking at designing client experience and you're looking at coaching your people on the boundaries and setting those realistic expectations, these are some of the areas that you might be looking at. Some specific things that you want to maybe take a look at in terms of augmenting your program, maybe adding to your program. If you're not doing any kind of internal feedback component, I think that that's a really important aspect to add. So again, client experience, we talk about getting feedback from clients, and all of that is external to us, but understanding and surveying your people about their perception of their role in client experience, I think is a really important aspect of this. You can use that indicator or that intelligence to create a picture of the relationship from both sides. And this is where it gets super interesting. In my experience, there are gaps. So your people feel like they're doing something really, really well, and your clients are not getting it. They don't don't understand when they're getting that attribute, they don't understand how it's being delivered, or they don't understand why it should be important to them. So, if your people are taking pride of ownership in, again, I'll use being proactive. If they take pride of ownership, I'm super proactive with my clients. I always get them stuff 2 days before it's due. And your clients have a definition of proactive that is, I want them to bring me ideas before, I even think of them. I want them to be thinking of me all the time. It's a misalignment between what we think we're delivering and what our clients are actually experiencing. And a lot of times, we don't uncover that with just the client side of the feedback. So if you're not surveying your internal employees, I think that that's a really an interesting aspect to add. Asking your employees similar questions to the way that you're phrasing those questions with clients. You adjust the wording a little bit, but we want to test, these are the attributes that are important to our existing clients, and how well do we think we're delivering on each of those inside of the organization. I think that another element that you might consider adding if you're not doing it yet is attributes between the client and that they're most satisfied with and least satisfied with, and which ones are most important. So in addition to the stuff that I think you're doing really well and the stuff that I feel like you're not doing so great, Add an importance test. Add a question on how important is that attribute to you. As you're thinking about hiring a firm to partner with for your particular work in this space, what are the things that you look for in hiring that firm? What are the attributes that are most important? What are least important? We usually recommend that when you're developing the questionnaire that the list of attributes is exactly the same for satisfaction, and then we test that with importance. So we go through a list of 10 things that are maybe tied to your firm's brand or tied to your firm's mission, 10 attributes that we want to make sure we're consistently delivering on a client experience side, proactive, timely, whatever some of those other attributes are. How satisfied are you on a scale of 1 to 7 with each of these? And then go back through the exact same list. How important is each one of these to you? Or you can do it vice versa. It doesn't really matter, but give them the opportunity to tell you how satisfied they are and also how important it is, because I think that there's a lot that you can learn from that. Again, when there are gaps between satisfaction and importance, those may point to some key areas that you want to pay attention to and where you maybe need to do some training with your people. So for instance, if they're highly dissatisfied with attributes that are important to them, those are probably red flags, right? If they rate you pretty low on satisfaction with proactive, for example, but it's one of those things that's really important to them, we need to be looking at our client experience process and what our people are doing within that, and that might be one that we want to focus on. Again, if I go back to price, if I'm like super dissatisfied or super satisfied with price, but price isn't really that important to me, then maybe there's not a whole lot that we need to do as it relates to our pricing model or that we need to be doing to address that. So, but again, if I'm a person on your team looking at how this ties back to the talent retention piece, if I don't understand that pricing isn't really that important, and I'm so focused on that and delivering what we're doing for a fair price, or I'm price sensitive on behalf of my clients, or I have a tendency to undervalue what I'm pricing for my clients because I feel like price is really important, but that's not really important to our clients. Again, there can be some causes of disconnect, some stress, some things that can maybe cause me to question, my role and the culture within the organization that's facilitating that. So be thinking about those things. These are just a few sample questions that you might kind of think about adding if you're looking at creating the internal and as well as the externally facing and kind of aligning those. So, what adjectives describe how you routinely serve clients? What are the top 3 adjectives that you would use in terms of the way that you serve clients? And let them sort of free respond to that. That one's not as easy when you get into like measuring and metrics and looking at the data on that one. That one you have to do a little bit more manual sort of development on categories of attributes because people don't always use the same words to describe things, but it is really interesting to see for your client-facing professionals how they think they serve clients. What do you think is most important to clients? So again, what do you think you're delivering really well, and what do you think is your perception of what's most important to our clients? What should we be focused on? And asking them to give you the top 3 items might be an interesting would be an interesting exercise or is an interesting data point for you to look at. What adjectives would you like to be known for? So we call these the aspirational attributes. So what do you think we should be focused on as an organization? And getting that input from your existing employees helps them to feel like that matters to your leadership team, right? Because I'm being asked, like, what are the things that I aspire to? I'm in this place right now, and these are the things that are important, but if we were really doing great work for our clients, this is what I think it would look like. And asking your employees to have some input on that and see what it tells you about where you should be focused or where you might be heading in the future. For clients, again, adjectives that you would use to describe our firm and see what kind of alignment there is there. That really speaks to sort of the brand recognition. I think it speaks to, what were the things that attracted you to our firm in the first place? What attributes are you most important in selecting a CPA firm or an architecture firm or an engineering firm or whatever it is? What are the things that are most important? So again, satisfaction versus importance. How can we improve? I think that's always a great question to ask, and most of you are probably asking that right now, but it might be an opportunity to learn some more things. And sometimes if we ask how can we improve, they'll also tell you the things that are working really well right now, and so that can give you some insight as well. I think it's also important to interview firm leaders separately or let firm leadership have a voice in this as well. So we ask our existing employees, we ask our clients, and then we specifically call out firm leaders, because the interesting thing about that is that sometimes firm leadership has a different way of looking at this than your existing professionals at other levels. So if you're asking what adjectives do you feel like as a firm describe the way that we serve clients, and you're asking that of firm leaders, and you can carve them out as a separate audience and look at a comparison between the way firm leaders responded to that and the way that your staff people responded to that, that also can point to or sort of expose some gaps in the way that our leadership thinks about it and talks about it, or the way our client experience team talks about it, and what's really getting through to our client-facing professionals. Is the message really resonating? Is there alignment there? Does firm leadership have one vision of how we're serving clients, but the people who are on the front lines and are really interacting with our existing clients have a totally different perspective on that? And it's important to understand that and to be able to shed light on that as well. So that might be something, those might be some things. I mentioned the value of plotting satisfaction or looking at satisfaction versus importance, and this is just a little bubble chart. This is super easy to take the data that you're getting on those. If you're using a rating system, so again, I mentioned, these are the 10 attributes that we want to test. How satisfied are you with our firm on these 10 different things, these 10 different attributes on a scale of 1 to 7, and how important is each of these on a scale of 1 to 7? And you plot them on an axis where you have one axis that's satisfaction and one axis that is importance. If those two things are perfectly correlated, so if I am as satisfied, if I'm satisfied in proportion to or relative to how important it is to me, so I give you a 5 on satisfaction and it's a 5 on importance, the dots will fall along this diagonal line. So you plot these, you look at the different attributes. So each one of these dots represents a different attribute that we tested. And this is just a sample that I pulled from some client data that we did last year. But if you look at, so the chart on the left, pretty good alignment, right? We have a few outliers. So there may be a couple of those attributes where satisfaction's a little bit high, but it's not really as important to them, or satisfaction is a little bit low relative to how important it is to them. So you can start to look and see where the outliers are and really decide then as a team. You can use this data, send it to your leadership team, or if you're at that table, you can look at it as leaders and say, here's something where we may be missing the boat. What do we need to do inside of our client experience program to bring this more into alignment, to be better about satisfying our clients on this thing that has too far of a deviation from the importance line. If you look at this example over here, you can see that their client experience is probably not delivering on the things that their clients find to be most important because there's less correlation between satisfaction and importance. So this is a really easy way to start to look at specific points, specific attributes, and understand the relationship between satisfaction and importance. And you can do the same analysis with the information that you gather from your existing people. And you can look at the data side by side and say, here's the relationship between satisfaction and importance that our clients are reporting, and here's what it looks like from the employee side. And again, you can start to make some decisions about what do we want to address, what do we need to address, and make those decisions at the management level so that you can start to trickle that down to your employees and give them those guardrails, give them that framework, and help them to understand the things that are really most important. And I think probably improve their satisfaction with the way they feel about the work that they're doing. Because if I'm focused on doing the things that I know are most important to my client and I'm doing those things well, and all of that is aligned, there's a tremendous amount of job satisfaction in that. And I feel like this is an area where we can really make some progress. The other thing that's super interesting about this, and I love the data stuff, and I knew I wasn't going to get too far into the data, but the other thing that you can do with this is you can segment it out by audience. So we've actually done some really interesting studies on this exact satisfaction versus importance for generational differences. So as your clients are moving into next generation leadership, we have plotted satisfaction versus importance for baby boomers versus Gen X leaders versus millennial leaders to see. And one of the interesting things that we have found as we have done this is that most of the time, firms are really well established at delivering a client experience that meets all of the criteria for their baby boomers, for their baby boomer clients, right? We have client service set up and are on top of satisfaction on the things that our baby boomer clients find are most important. But when you start looking at that for Generation X, there's a little bit more deviation. And when you get into millennials, it's harder to get into millennials because there's not a ton of data out there. There are not that many millennials yet, at least at the clients that I work with that are in those leadership positions. But you can start to see that there are deviations among the generations. So you could use this again as a predictive indicator to say the millennial decision makers that we work with are not aligned in this at all. And here are the things that are really, really missing for them, technology or accessibility or whatever those things are. And you can start to evolve the way that you create that client experience, and you can start to train your people early. And so again, I think that this can be really interesting and fascinating as it relates to generational transitions of your existing clients, and making sure that as we're focused on fostering loyalty, that it's loyalty of the relationship even through those transitions that happen inside of their leadership teams. So this is a really interesting aspect. This is just a sample client journey map, and I think the thing that you can add to this that helps to contribute to talent retention, so again, this is just a sample, and everybody's got sort of a different way of looking at this, but I think looking at where in each of these stages of client experience, there might be friction points for our people, and understanding what are the friction points that we're sort of willing to have our people deal with. Because it can't always be all about our people, it can't always be all about our client. We've got to figure out what the balance is. So thinking about at each one of these stages as you're mapping that journey and how your clients are feeling in that moment, adding to it, how do we feel like our employees are feeling at that moment? What is their emotional state of mind during that piece of the process, and what do we need to do in order to make them feel better about that if we feel like there's tension? So billing is always one area where I feel like there's friction. And so what do we need to do in terms of the invoicing process, either further back in the process and setting a different kind of expectation and using the right kind of language, or even at the time of billing, how do we teach our people to communicate, here's the value that I delivered for you in conjunction with here's also the invoice, so that they can also feel better about the way they're invoicing and not have that be a source of stress for them. So there may be things at each one of these stages that, in addition to how our clients are feeling about it, we need to explore how our people are feeling about it at the same time. Looking at my time here. Ooh. All right. We're almost done. The last thing I want to talk about, just metrics and measurement. Are we moving the needle? And again, you guys have all kinds of metrics and measurement and KPIs as it relates to the client relationships, but these might be a few to pay attention to if you're augmenting your program to contribute to talent retention. So you might look at things like turnover rate over time. Are we having an effect? As we start to implement this, and it's a longer term thing, so this isn't something that's going to change, in the next first 6 months that you implement, but year over year, are we starting to see an impact on turnover rate? And I know there are a lot of other things that affect turnover, so I'm not, saying that this is going to solve all of your turnover problems, but are we having any kind of an impact? So pay attention to that. How many of you guys are doing exit interviews with people as they leave? So adding some questions, which is great, adding some questions to those exit interviews that help you better understand the reasons that they're leaving. So again, there may be things like, my spouse got a job somewhere else and I have to move. And if that's the case, I would consider, remote workforce, but we're not going to talk about that. But in those exit interviews, what are you learning? Are there things that we have deliberately tried to impact through the way that we have designed client experience? And are those things still coming up in the exit interviews, or are they not? And so understanding that. How many of you are conducting stay interviews? How many of you are interviewing your best employees and figure out what they like about you? A few of you, a few hands are up, and I think that's great. And if you're not, that's another thing that I might consider adding to your program is a stay interview with your loyal clients on an annual basis. And I would separate this, in my experience, I think it's good to separate this from the compensation and promotion, sort of the evaluation conversation. I think at some point during the year, outside of that discussion, you should sit down with some of your really loyal employees and ask them, tell me what you like about working here. Tell me about, what you wish was different. Again, it's sort of a preemptive, let's try to keep them engaged with us. So doing those stay interviews and listen to what they say. And again, tying that back to client experience, are they talking about some of the things? Are you hearing in those stay interviews some of the things that you're trying to affect through your client experience feedback model? And then again, regular employee experience surveys as well could be helpful. A few other indicators, just things that you might pay attention to. Are there any changes in new hires? Are we hiring differently now than we were a year ago based on the client experience model? Do we need a different skill set, or do we need a different set of, sort of personality characteristics? Obviously, the technical is a given. We need our people to be technically proficient, but are we looking for different traits? And so that might be one of the things that you look at. You might look at changes in your client experience results year over year, because I think that the other thing that we hope this impacts is growth and loyalty and all of those things that our system is designed to do. So is it still delivering that? if we shift our focus, if we augment in some of these ways and maybe should focus on talent retention, using this in talent retention, is it causing any changes to our client experience ratings? Are they going up? Maybe they will be going up as our employees are more satisfied, as they stay longer, as we lose fewer people and we have better continuity in serving our relationships. We might see that happen as well. Net promoter scores might trend up. Looking at those internal survey results year over year and monitoring changes, again, are the gaps narrowing? Are the satisfaction and importance understanding between clients and our people on an annual basis? Those bubble charts that I looked at. If we start tracking that and looking at it year over year, are we starting to see those bubbles come more into alignment with where our line is? Are there fewer gaps between what our people think is important and what our clients think is important, so we have a better common understanding of the way that those two ecosystems are working together? Measuring results, there's a tracker in there if you haven't done that. So just a few things, if you want a different outcome, change your process just a little bit. Again, not a 180-degree turnaround. I'm not telling anyone to deviate from the primary role of client experience, which is revenue and growth and driving that inside of your firms. But I also think that we are in a place where talent retention is important enough that we need to be looking at, how can we take this thing that we're already doing and maybe tweak it to apply to a different problem that we're trying to solve and making that bigger difference. And find that balance, which is the hardest part of all of this. That's the art in the science that we are all engaged in at this point, but there are ways to do it. So I am at the end of my time, so I appreciate you hanging with me. I have a few additional resources here, just additional reading, stuff that you might find is helpful. The Deloitte Workplace Burnout Survey in particular is interesting. That's a cross-section, so that's not specific to professional services, even though Deloitte's an accounting firm, it's actually a cross-section. So there are a couple of other things on there. My contact information, if you would like copies of the slides, I'm happy to share those. So just let me know if you're interested in those, and thank you.